Okay, let's get started. Tonight is part 3 in our series on the 8th chapter of Bava, which is called Hachovel. We are going to spend most of tonight on 84a, but we will get onto 84b very briefly. And we are going to finish up this collection of attempts to derive that we charge people money for physical damage rather than actually poking out people's eyes or chopping off their hands. And we're going to touch on at the very end the question of the authority of the Jewish court system outside of the land of Israel, which is then going to be something we're going to get into in a lot more detail in a couple of weeks when we come back again after Sukkot. This year may be slightly shorter than they've been lately, but on the one hand, I didn't want to get deeply into this other thing that we don't have time to do tonight, and also they've been a little bit too long, so it'll be whatever it is. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we are still, for the third week, in the middle of trying to demonstrate that nezek, let's call it for the moment, punishment or compensation for permanent damage to another person's body, is money as opposed to actually injuring the other person. And I will include the same caveat that I've included the last 2 lessons, which was that if you need to prove something more than 3 times, then none of the proofs is actually where you're getting it from. It means that it's something that you deeply know to be true, and you know it to be true from some source that's not actually connected to any of these things. Because if we had an actual source everyone could point to and say, yeah, that's where I learned it from, we'd be finished. The lady is protesting too much here. Not in the sense that they don't believe it's true, but in the sense that they don't actually think it comes from any of these derivations. It's something that they know for sure is true, and they don't like any of the derivations, so they're including all of them because the truth must be in here somewhere, because it has to be true somehow. Okay, so we have Rav Papa in the name of Rava here, and he says, Amarkra, the Torah says, V'rapo yirapeh, litain refuah b'makom nezek. Okay, so this V'rapo yirapeh is from the same 21st chapter of Shemot, where we've been getting most of our quotes from. Well, let's get a whole verse. It's 21:19. In fact, let's go back to the previous pasuk because it's really all one sentence. If men are fighting and one man hits the other with a rock or a fist, and he does not die, and he falls down to a lying down place. Let's call that a bed. If he gets up and he walks outside, al mishanto, and al mishanto is a little bit ambiguous. It could mean he is supporting himself, meaning he's not leaning on anything when he goes outside, or it could mean he is leaning on something. And I realize those two things are exact opposites of each other, and I find that frustrating. The halacha follows the second, the first, which is to say that you're not actually off the hook until the person is able to walk unassisted. But when he gets up and walks outside on his support, which we're going to read as supporting himself, then the assailant is cleansed, meaning he's not a murderer. At that point, even if the guy dies, it's not considered a direct result of the original attack because he was too healthy in the middle for that to be the case. However, he has to pay his shevet, his unemployment, and he has to heal him. Okay, so the Rav Papa in the name of Rava quotes this presumably much older midrash that says that he just needs to heal him, that is telling us that he needs to heal him even if he also has to have nezek. And I'm being vague in my verbs because if I say pay, it sounds like I mean money, and I'm not sure what other verb to use. So whatever. There's healing even in a place where there's also nezek. And if you think that nezek means actually cutting off body parts, actually injuring people, then kihechi dehai by asya, hainai by asya. Then just like the victim needs medical care for his wound, the assailant is also going to need medical care for his wound. So you shouldn't need to deal with these things separately, and you shouldn't need to prove to me that there's going to be medical care when there's also nezek, because of course there's medical care when there's nezek. If the injury that I gave you resulted in you needing to go to the doctor, when the court does the exact same injury to me, I'm also going to have to go to the doctor. So we don't have to separately say, and also you have to pay medical bills, because I'm already being punished by having to pay my own medical bills, which should presumably be similar to yours, since we, after all, have the same injury. So therefore, it seems to Rav Papa in the name of Rava that this statement about medical care can only make sense in a context in which nezek is a financial payment as opposed to an actual injury. If you can separate the damage to the body from the medical care as two separate things, and sometimes you have one and sometimes you have the other, and you don't always have them both together, then you're not actually damaging anyone, because if you were damaging them, they'd have to go to the doctor. Okay, but the Gemara doesn't think that that's so compelling. My kusha, wait, what's your problem? Dilma ika de salik bisrei haya, v'ika de lo salik bisrei haya. Maybe there are some people whose flesh grows back quickly, and there are other people whose flesh grows back slowly. So it might be that I'm going to grievously injure you. Now, I don't know, chop your arm off or something. And the court will chop my arm off. And even if they duplicate the injury exactly, I might heal faster than you, and I might not pay as much in doctor bills as I deserve to have to pay, because my body might just grow back faster. Maybe I'm just have a faster healing body. Maybe I'm healthier. Maybe I'm younger. Maybe I have more food. Whatever it is, bodies are not the same. And so the Gemara says, okay, but who cares? Fine, some people heal faster than others. What difference does that make? And they say, no, it matters, because because what that means is that you could pay the difference. So I'm going to try to work my way back through the layers of the logic. Okay, so first, at the face of it, what this line means is that it's possible for me to have to pay for your medical care, even if I had my own arm chopped off as a punishment, because if the court decides that I haven't paid enough yet for my own medical bills, they might maybe pay some of your medical bills because I haven't been punished adequately yet, because it happens that my medical bills weren't expensive enough. So they'll make me pay the difference between my medical bills and yours. Okay, now, the fact that you can read it that way means that the midrash that says that it's possible to have both nezek and medical bills is compatible with both interpretations. It could be compatible with an interpretation in which nezek is money. It could also be compatible with an interpretation in which nezek is actual injury. And so we can't prove anything because it could work either way. The fact that the way that we would make it compatible with the actual injury interpretation is stretched, to say the least, is not really that bothersome, because the truth is the idea that we would chop people's body parts off is also stretched, to say the least. It's not more bizarre than the suggestion that we would cut off people's body parts. So since we haven't proved that it's impossible to have this midrash and also chop off people's body parts, so this is not of use to us. Okay, moving on to our next suggestion. Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, Atya tachat tachat mishor. Rav Ashi says, let's try a gzera shava using the word tachat from the case of the ox. Now, we had the word tachat an awful lot in our various texts, usually meaning in place of. I know that it often means underneath, but it in our text meant in place of. So ayin tachat ayin, an eye in place of an eye. We've also seen nefesh tachat nafesh, a soul in place of a soul, and shor tachat shor, an ox in place of an ox. We've seen a lot of others also, but those are the ones that are going to be players in this Gemara. And one other from Devarim, which is a different use of the word, and we'll get to it when we get to it. So he wants to connect up the eye with the ox. So Ketiv hacha ayin tachat ayin. It says here in this verse that we've quoted many times, an eye in place of an eye, in Shemot 21:24. Uchtiv hatam, and it also is written over there in Shemot 21:36. Shalem yishalem shor tachat hashor. He will surely pay an ox for an ox. Now, you could look at this comparison and say, well, if you killed the guy's ox, you're giving him an ox. So if you took his arm, you should have to give him an arm. Right? Like, that is a parallel you could make. They're not interested in making that parallel for two reasons. One is that it's not true that you actually give the guy an ox. You don't have to give him an ox. You pay him for the ox that you killed. So we don't actually want to go that route, because then you'd actually have to find an ox and give it to him, and he might end up with an ox he doesn't like and whatever. So we don't actually want that. The other is that we're trying to prove that an eye for an eye means money, and we would like to get to that destination. So we're going to connect an eye in place of an eye with an ox in place of an ox, and we have already interpreted that the ox in place of an ox means that you pay him the money that his ox was worth, rather than that you actually give him an animal. So we're going to say the same thing here, that you give him what his eye was worth. So, malahalan mamon afkan, just like over there it's money, so also here it is money. Okay, but as I mentioned, this is by no means the only tachat that we have, and now we have to challenge why we chose this one. My chazit dialafta tachat mishor. So what did you see that made you think you should choose this particular tachat and learn the gzera shava from the ox? Neilaf tachat me'adam. Let's find a way to learn a gzera shava of tachat and tachat from a case with a human. I think we're assuming here that cases about people are going to be more similar, or supposed to be more similar, than cases about animals. That our text in Shemot 21 specifically seems to draw a distinction between cases about people and cases about animals a couple of times, so that's a reasonable assumption. But we may also be assuming that there's something undignified about comparing people to animals, but I think it's more about the legal similarity, because we're going to have other, let's compare this to something more similar to it, kinds of compunctions and other cases, and it's usually about similarity. Okay, so let's see what we came up with. Dichtiv, as it says in Shemot 21:23, and this is the case in which you actually, committed murder. Let's have a whole pasuk here because it matters. 21:23 is the case where somebody, well, let's start two pasukim earlier, or one pasuk earlier, with 22. So this is a different case in which we have two men who are fighting, and vinagfu isha hara, and they hit a pregnant woman, v'yatzu yaladeha v'lo yasa, and her babies come out, but she doesn't die, meaning she loses the pregnancy. I think we're assuming that the fetus is not old enough to be delivered and dies. But the mother does not die. Anosh ye anesh. Whoever it is that hit her will be punished. Kasher yashit alav bal haisha, an amount which the husband of the woman will set on him, with the help of the court, because we don't just allow litigants to just announce amounts of money that other people have to pay them. That would be not good court procedure. Vinatan biflilim, and he'll give it in court. On the other hand, v'im ason yeh, but if the woman dies, right? This is a case where I'm in a life and death struggle with somebody. I'm trying to kill the person who I'm fighting with, and I incidentally kill somebody else instead. In that case, v'natat nefesh tachat nefesh, you should give life for a life, a soul for a soul. That seems to be prescribing a death penalty for somebody who's trying to kill one person and they kill somebody else by mistake. Yes, Roni.
Question. Reading the pasuk, is there any way you can interpret it that the pregnant woman was one of the people fighting, or is it this person is for sure a bystander?
I don't think so, because it says that they hit her. So unless there's at least there has to be at least 3 people in the original fight.
Makes sense.
But also, yeah, no, I don't think so, and I'm not sure that it would. I don't think it matters. I think the point of the pasuk is that even if you kill the person you're not fighting with, you're still going to get the death penalty. I think we'd make a kal v'chomer to somebody you're actually trying to kill.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking actually it would be because if the other person is also trying to kill you, like if it's a mutual killing situation, like if you're both fighting to kill and one kills the other, like that might be a little different than if like you're both fighting to kill, but then you kill this other third person. But yeah, I can see that logic as well.
That's true. On the other hand, yeah, I don't know how we deal with cases where the Gemara is full of cases in which one person does one thing to somebody else.
Yeah.
A situation in which the 2 of you have been trying to kill each other for 20 minutes and nobody cares or remembers anymore who started it. I actually don't know what we do with that legally.
Well, which is unfortunate because I feel like is how most fights exist in reality.
Most of reality is not clean, cut and dried the way most legal texts are. And the longer my daughter stays in law school and calls me to read aloud to me from her textbooks every day, the more I discover that it's not just our legal system that works that way.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So I don't think it matters is the simple answer. This, by the way, this pasuk is one of the main things that gets quoted in all of the fighting about the Torah's attitude towards abortion. The way I just translated it is a distinctly Jewish translation. The Christian translation is different and much more anti-abortion. But let's not. We don't need to go there. But I did deliberately translate it our way, not somebody, because there is another way to do it. In any case, if we make this analogy, if we make this Gezerah Shava from an eye for an eye to a soul for a soul, that's not going to get us the result we want, right? Malahalan mamash, afkan mamash. Just like there, we're actually going to kill the murderer. Here, if we make that analogy, we should actually be chopping off hands and poking out eyes and whatever. So we would very much like to preserve the original purity of our Gezerah Shava, in which we compared to an ox, got the result that we wanted, and didn't have to get the wrong result. But in order to do that, we're going to have to reject this. Derivation. So Amri, and we don't know who these people are, but whoever they are, they said, "Danin nezikin min nezikin ve'ein danin nezikin nimit." We learn damages from damages, and we don't learn damages from death. Okay, so now we're in a contradiction about, right, which is less similar to a case of a person injuring another person. Is that an animal injuring another animal or killing another animal? Or is that a person killing an animal for that matter? Or is that a person killing a person? And in the end, we're going to reject all of them and go with another case of a person injuring a person. But at the moment, those are our choices. We've got a case which we're calling damages because it involves killing an animal, but the truth is the animal's still dead. We're just calling it damages because we think of animals as money rather than as people. Or we have a case of what we're calling death, by which we mean human death. And the Gemara says, Adarabah, to the contrary, Danin Adam me Adam, ve'ein Danin Adam mi behema. No, wait a minute. Don't tell me about damages versus death. I think we should compare people to people, and we shouldn't compare people to animals. That seems to me that the identity of the victim is more important than what kind of injury happened. Especially hiding in the background is that all of the other injuries are actually death. Just we don't care about it when it belongs to an ox. Okay, Ela Amar Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi actually suggested something else entirely. And here we need to go to Devarim 22:29 to a different use of the word tachat, but at least it's in the context of a human committing a tort against another human, which is what we're looking for. Okay, we have, let's start from verse 28, actually. Kimtza ish na'ara betula. If a man finds a virginal young woman, asher lo arasa, who is not married, utifasa, and he grabs her, v'shachavima, and he lies with her, v'nimtza'u, and then they're found. Right, so we have here a man raping an unmarried young woman, presumably out in somewhere where she doesn't have help available. In that case, v'natan ha'ish hashochavima, then the man who lay with her must give la'avi ha'na'ara, to the father of the young woman, 50 kesef, 50 silver coins. And the reason he's giving it to the father seems to be because of the next clause, which is velo tiyeh le'isha, and he has to marry her, although by the time the Gemara is done with it, he only has to marry her if both she and her father want him to marry her. But the Torah doesn't specifically say that. Tachat asher ina, and tachat asher here does not seem to mean in place of. It seems to mean because of. Because he oppressed her, humiliated her. This word is a little bit flexible. He was mean to her. I don't know exactly what the best translation is. Lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. He can never divorce her. Although again, by the time the Gemara is done with it, it means he can never divorce her unless she wants out. Right? It means that she gets all the decision power about whether or not she's married to him for the rest of her life, is what the Gemara thinks this means. And presumably that's why you give the money to the father, because if you give it to him, it's much too easy if he marries her for him to just take it back. Whereas the father presumably has a separate residence in which he can store money that does not necessarily end up back in the hands of the guy who you took it from as a fine. Okay, so the tachat here does not mean in place of. As I said, it seems to mean because of instead. But this is a case of a human being committing an act of violence against another human being and then being punished by having to pay money. The 50 silver coins are certainly money, and the marriage, depending on how you look at it, can also be construed as forcing him to support her for the rest of her life, among other things. That's not the only thing it does, but it certainly is also very expensive. So Elamar Rav Ashi says, Mitachat asher ina yalifle. Let's learn it from this verse in Devarim. Adam me Adam v'nezikin minizikin. It's a person from a person, and it's also damages from damages. So I don't actually have to listen to any of your criticisms about my original derivation, because I've got a better verse, and now you've got nothing to say. And it would seem, in fact, that this is successful because we don't. There's no further attempt to challenge it. So far we have two derivations this evening. The first one we rejected. The second one we seem to accept once we've modified it a little bit. And now we are done with derivations for the moment, and going to move on to something a little bit different, and then something a lot different. Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ayin tachat ayin mamash. So Breita says, Rabbi Eliezer says, an eye for an eye means actually poking out eyes. And the Gemara cannot believe this. Mamash socket. They're like, what? You really think that he really could have said actual? Which tells you something about, for the last page and a half, we've been saying, it must be really poking out eyes. Well, no, let's see if we can prove that it's not. The fact that they can't imagine anybody actually believing that it means actually poking out eyes, it means that they were never taking that possibility seriously themselves either. It was always a straw man. Okay, in any case, they cannot imagine that he could have said such a thing. Rabbi Eliezer, lately, kechol hani tanai, is it possible that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't agree with all these other rabbis that we've been quoting for the last page and a half? Not all of whom were Tanaim, but enough of them were. Rabbi Eliezer himself is a Tana and therefore cannot possibly know about anything that was said by an Amora because they weren't born yet when he was expressing his opinions. But there are plenty of people who are old, whose the stuff they're quoting is old enough that he would have known about it. So that's not a problem. It just doesn't mean everybody. Amar Rabba. So Rabba says, I have a way to understand Rabbi Eliezer. Lomar she'ein shaminoto ke'eved. Rabba says, what he means is that we don't assess him as a slave. And Abaye, who is Rabba's student, says, wait a minute, what? Ella, come on, ben chorin? Ben chorin eat me leidane. Abaye says, that doesn't make any sense. How could we possibly assess him if we don't assess him as a slave? Free people don't have a price attached to them. And, so we talked last time about how, in fact, this is a problem with living in a free society without slavery. Not a problem that makes me want to go back to having slavery, but still, it's a real thing that if people don't have prices on them, it's very hard to talk about in terms of amounts of money, what people lose when they lose parts of their physical bodies. Like that, we have ways of attaching a price to it, but they're not as good as, they're not as accurate as a slave market would. So Abaye says it doesn't make any sense to say that we do assess him, but not as a slave, because that's nonsense. Ella Amar Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi tried something else. Lomar she'ein shaminoto b'nizak ela b'mazik. Rav Ashi says Rabba sort of remembered correctly what Rabbi Eliezer meant, which is to say we do assess somebody on the slave market, but we don't assess the victim, we assess the assailant. Meaning, an eye for an eye really does mean that if I poked your eye out, I deserve to have my eye poked out. Now, we're not going to poke my eye out for an assortment of reasons that we've already listed, including that it might not turn out to be fair, and that I might die, and that maybe some of these other derivations are legally accurate. We've got lots of reasons for not poking my eye out. But the eye I'm paying for when I pay money is my eye, because I was supposed to lose my eye, and I'm paying for the right to keep my eye. That's Rabbi Eliezer's take, as opposed to what we saw in the Mishnah, which is I am paying for the eye that I destroyed, in the same way as if I don't know, throw a baseball through your window. I don't pay you the value of the windows in my house. I pay you the value of the window I actually broke. Right? So the Mishnah is taking it as you pay for what you broke, just like you would with an object. And Rabbi Eliezer is taking it as a more of a moral stance. You deserve to lose your eye, so you need to pay for your own eye, which is not on a damages level necessarily going to make sense, because it might be that my body is nowhere near as valuable as the body of the person who I damage, and they're not going to get, or my body is much more valuable. But either way, the amount of money is not necessarily going to line up with the amount of money that they
or in an extreme case,
yeah.
Suppose you have your eye poked out by a blind man.
Right. So Rabbi Eliezer might say that they don't owe damages in that case. Right. Which would be, or not nezek, they're still going to owe the other 4 payments. which would be troubling. But as I said, it has the advantage of holding the moral high ground in the sense that we're not treating people's bodies as just objects that you can break and then pay for because they're just stuff that can be bought and sold. So whereas the Mishnah really did treat people's bodies that way in a way that's a little icky. Okay. Now we move on to a couple of cases that seem to have actually happened. We don't have as many details as we'd like, and they're a little strange, but okay. A donkey cut off the hand of a child, probably by biting it, would be my guess. Although I guess they could step on it in a way that severed it. I don't know. Children are fragile, but I don't know donkey anatomy that well. In any case, Ata the Kameder of Papa Bar Shmuel. So the case came in front of Rav Papa Bar Shmuel. Amar Lahu, and he said to them, Zilu Shumule Arba Dvar. He said to them, go out and assess the 4 things. You may remember that our Mishnah had 5 things. We're still only discussing the first one, which was Nezek, but there were 5 aspects of the damages in our Mishnah. Amar le Rava, so Rava said to him, V'ha'anan chamishatznan, but we have 5 in our Mishnah, so like, why are you saying 4? Amar le, he said back, Levar mi nezek kamina, I meant other than nezek. At which point Abaye pops up with, but v'hachamorhu, but wait a minute, this is a donkey. V'chamor enu mishalim ela nezek. And donkeys, although this is true of all animals, are only supposed to pay nezek. The other 4 payments are only paid by humans. I mean, animals never actually pay anything, but their owners don't pay the other. Yes, Roni.
I was just gonna be like, does that mean like we're not like chopping off the donkey's arm or anything? It's the owner's paying the quantity, right?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
As a little bit of a tribute to Rabbi Eliezer, it's worth mentioning that there is a position, and we may even rule like it, that when an animal does damage, the damages that the owner pays are never allowed to be more than the value of the animal.
Oh, interesting.
So,
wait, so if an animal kills a person, then
an animal kills a person, we kill the animal.
Right, but does the person get? Oh, this is totally a tangent. We don't have to get into what happens anyway.
Yeah, but no, I don't think the owner has to pay damages. I think they just lose the animal.
Interesting. Okay.
And so yeah, so yes, the animal pays it in the sense that the animal can't ever have to pay more than his own or her own value. But the person actually shelling out the cash in court is presumably going to be the human. Also in the sense that wild animals don't pay anything, not, usually having money. Although even if they did, I don't think we'd take it away from them. Okay, so in any case, but Abaya's got a good point, which is that animals only pay for the actual damage they cause. They don't pay for the other aspects of human damage. So Amar Lahu Zilu Shumule Nizke. He says, okay, go assess the nezek. Like, he accepts this correction, and now we're going to move forward with that as the plan. And they say V'haka avda by l'mishaime. They say, okay, but then we're going to have to assess him as a slave. So he says, okay, Zilu Shaimu Kavta, go assess him as a slave. Like, I don't understand what the problem is. At which point the father of the baby or the child pops up with Lo Ba'ina Dezila Be'milta. I don't want you to take my baby to the slave market and ask them to, put him on the auction block, because that's gross. Amrule they said to him, you don't really have a right to make a decision that's going to cost your kid a lot of money. Like, this is not, you're the one who's going to be holding onto this money as a trustee for some period of time until your child gets to adulthood, but it's not your money you're turning down. You can't just say no like that. And so he says, Amr lahu l'chi gadil mefaisen alei mididi. He says, you know what? When the kid grows up, I'll appease him by paying him money from my money. which seems to be the end of the case. They seem to have let the father agree to pay the damages himself. I mean, an unspecified amount of damages, because we're never going to know how much it is, because finding out how much it is exactly what the dad won't let them do. But the father has agreed that he'll pay whatever it takes to make the kid happy once the kid grows up. And so we've basically terminated the court case, and we're not going to do anything to the owner of the donkey. Presumably, we are going to order the owner of the donkey to restrain the donkey or kill it or something. Like, we're not just going to stand there and let donkeys run around eating pieces of children. But we're not going to charge the owner money, because we have no idea how much money to charge him, because the father wouldn't let us find out. Okay. Our next case. Hahu Torah, the alas yade dinuka. So now we have an ox that chewed the hand of a child. And the case comes before Rava. Amar lahu zilu shaimuhu ka'avda. And Rava says, go assess him like a slave, which is what we would expect him to say. But Amrle, they said to him, Marhu da Amar kol hanisham ke'eved in gofin b'Bava. And the students say, but Rava, you're the one who told us that any case that requires assessing people as slaves cannot be collected in Bava. So, like, why are we bothering to go through the process of determining how much money the guy owes if we're not planning to collect the money anyway? That doesn't even make any sense. Amar lahu lo tzricha de'it tafas. He says, no, it is necessary, because maybe he'll seize the money. Probably not the child, probably an adult acting on the behalf of the child. But it seems like Rava is treating whatever this money is that he's refusing to collect, he's not exactly treating it as if it's not owed, but he's not exactly treating it as if it's owed either. It sounds like he's not willing to collect it in either direction, right? If I steal it from you, he won't take it back from me, but if you steal it from me, he's not going to take it back from you either. This money is just sort of uncollectible in any direction. And in order to make it uncollectible, we're going to have to know how much money it is that's not collectible. This seems like a recipe for disaster, in which people are going to be sneaking into each other's houses to grab piles of money all the time. Like, this does not sound like a civilized society to me. And I don't know to what extent he was serious and that people ever actually grabbed other people's money. Like, I don't know if that was a real thing, but it seems to me like a bad idea if it's happening on a regular basis. In any case, that's the case with the odds. Now we're going to do a little analysis. Rava is being consistent. De Amar Rava nizke shor b'shor v'nizke shor ba'adam govino to b'Bava. As Rava said that damages committed by an ox on another ox, or damages committed by an ox on a person, can be collected in Babylonia. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. Damages, yeah, ox on human means the person damaged the ox. I got that backwards, sorry. As opposed to nizke adam ba'adam v'nizke adam b'shor, as opposed to a person who was injured by a person, or a person who was injured by an ox, ein govino to b'Bava. We do not collect those in Babylon. And by Babylonia, I think we're assuming we mean everywhere outside the land of Israel. And it's just this happens to be where they were, but we mean the exile in general. Well, let's assume that for right now, and unless that becomes untenable later. So, Maishna nizke adam ba'adam v'nizke adam b'shor delo. So why would the damages of people, either by people or by oxen, why would they be different so that we can't collect them? And tentatively, we suggest that the answer is that Elohim ba'inan v'leka. Elohim here means judges, not God. We need judges, and we don't have them. Now, we mentioned, for those of you who were here last year, we spent some time, I don't know, sometime in the winter, during our study of the first chapter of Sanhedrin, we spent some time on the idea of smicha. And here we're going to return to that for a moment. The original smicha, which conferred the title of rabbi, which we don't use anymore. Never mind that the English word rabbi is derived from it, but that's because English itself gets its words about Judaism from the Greek and Latin version of the New Testament, which got its words about Judaism from us around the time the Mishnah was written. So English is kind of missing 2,000 years worth of Jewish history in its vocabulary. But leaving that aside, we don't use the title Rabbi anymore. That title was supposed to confer an unbroken chain of teacher to student to teacher to student to teacher to student, going back to Moshe putting his hands on Yehoshua's head in last week's Parsha. And that kind of smicha was only conferred in the land of Israel. The first, supposing that this understanding of history is actually what happened, which I have no way of knowing, the first exile from Israel wasn't long enough to cause a problem with that, because there are still people alive who saw the first temple, standing there watching the construction of the second temple. And they're very upset, by the way. And this is a very, very moving passage in Nehemiah in which the younger people are having this big party with shofrod and other musical instruments and singing and dancing. And the old people are standing on the side wailing because their beautiful, giant, fancy gold and rock stone building has been replaced by a wooden shack that's like hideous and tiny. And the wailing is louder than the singing and dancing and music. It's really, in any case, so it's entirely possible that there could be a continued smicha in the land of Israel that would go right through that exile. It was very short. But the exile we're in now has been going on for quite some time. And the Romans made the public teaching of Torah illegal sometime, I don't know, maybe 100 years after the close of the Mishnah, at which point it became relatively quickly, it became impossible to give smicha in the land of Israel, and that kind of smicha disappeared. In the meantime, in Babylonia, they invented a whole new title, Rav, to confer, we think that you know a lot of Torah and you should be allowed to tell people what to do, but you don't have smicha. And we've been using that title ever since. But it doesn't make you an officially ordained, Torah-recognized judge. Okay, so when it says in the Gemara, we need judges and we don't have any, what that means is in order to rule on this kind of case, we would need somebody the Torah recognizes as a judge. And those people simply don't exist, either in our historical period or in our physical location. Okay, but we don't love that explanation because Nizke Shor Bishor Vishor Ba'adam Nami Elohim Ba'inan V'Leiko. The damages that are damaged when an animal is damaged, either by another animal or by a person, should also require real judges. So we shouldn't be willing to try those cases either. Ela Maishna Shor Bishor Vishor Ba'adam. In fact, what is different about the cases in which animals are damaged as opposed to people, such that we are willing to collect on those cases in Babylonia? Because we are doing their shlichut, we're acting as their agents, just like we do with admissions and loans. Okay, so what that means is that we are constructing a legal reality, which may or may not have anything to do with historical reality, but we're constructing a legal reality in which the last generations of actual judges who existed, of actual people with smicha who existed, gave instructions to people who didn't have smicha that they should continue for some indefinite period of time to carry out certain actions which they would, during that period of time, be allowed to be considered to be doing as agents of that last court. So theoretically, in 2022 when a judge orders somebody to pay a loan. The reason that they're allowed to do that is because they're acting on an agency granted to them by somebody who's been dead for 1700 years. That's obviously, as I said, a legal reality, because obviously the person who's been dead for 1700 years did not actually depute the person who was born in 1980 to be their agent. Like, that's not physically possible. But that legal fiction is what has allowed our legal court system to continue to operate for the last, however many years it's been that we've been operating it that way. But it has parameters, and we're going to have to spend our next year trying to explore what those parameters are, because apparently some kinds of cases can be collected, like admissions and loans. A loan is fairly obvious. That's when you lent me money and I say you didn't lend me money, and then you sue me and now I have to pay you because I lose. An admission is where you lent me money, I say I don't owe you money in court, but you bring witnesses that I've been walking around town telling everybody else that I do owe you the money. And that is in fact your proof that I owe you the money, and I lose and I end up at, so it's just a subset of loans. And apparently also, if I damage your animal or my animal damages your animal, those cases too. And there will be other cases also, but we're going to have to figure out some sort of logic to distinguish between the different kinds of cases, because in theory, if you're willing to construct this legal fiction, you could theoretically construct a legal fiction in which that last generation of real judges said, oh, go ahead and do all the things that we always do. Just keep things going the way they're supposed to go. And then there would be no limitations at all. So we're going to have to construct some sort of logical framework for which things we do collect and which things we don't collect. But that will be for next time. Okay, turns out Sheer was not shorter than it was supposed to be. But does anyone have questions?
I have like a million questions about like slave markets and like embarrassment, but I don't know if everyone has to like stick around if they don't want to like hear me ask a million questions about that. I
don't know very much about slave markets, but I can pretend I do.
Okay. I mean, I guess I want to, if anyone else has a question that's a little more like particular to this, I want to make sure that they get their question heard first. But if no one does, I can ask about slave markets. The biggest thing that came up for me is like, obviously from my very tiny amount of economics knowledge, markets can be very localized. So in terms of slave markets, let's say like, I mean, I could just think of so many scenarios where that could pose a problem if someone's like traveling between places, but they're from, let's say, the Boston slave market, which is totally different than the, I don't know, New York slave market. I'm just places I know, right, that have very different economies and costs and everything. Like that could be a huge issue if they get compensated the wrong amount. And like assessed for the wrong amount, because let's say they're more valuable in a different region. Like how does that, I don't know, it just seems like because there's no like universal slave market, right? It's a very localized system.
Right. So slave markets were globalized at least as much as any other market was. And there's a lot of global trade in the Roman Empire. That's actually, at least for rich people, a major part of life. The answer is I know absolutely nothing about this as it pertains to slave markets. However, as it pertains to regular objects, like I smashed your wine barrel full of wine or whatever, if I'm just damaging your stuff, I believe we go with its value in the location that it's at the moment that I destroy it.
If I by chance drove it out somewhere that has cheaper like property values or whatever, and then destroyed it.
Well, no, then I stole it, and we're gonna.
That's
the
true.
moment that I took it is gonna be the relevant moment.
True.
I think.
Yeah.
If I was supposed to be watching your stuff, didn't watch it well enough, and then it got destroyed at some point in the middle, there's actually a machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel about that one in the 3rd chapter, I think, of Bava Metzia, about and. one of them says that it's the value at the moment when you destroy it, and the other one says it's the highest value that it had at any point along the timeline.
Okay.
I don't remember which one's which, but they were certainly well aware of this issue.
Yeah.
Not as much about moving from place to place as about things changing price over time, right? Because just today we happen not to have kidnapped very many men, and we only kidnap women. So now the price of male slaves goes up, right? Which is a horrible thing to say, and I can't believe I just said that with a smile on my face. But whatever, they're certainly familiar with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm just speculating because I don't actually know anything about this with reference to humans. My guess would be that the auctioneer at the slave market has the kind of expertise that he could tell you what the person was worth yesterday too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, makes sense. Another slave related question, is that okay? My question was about the father who was like, that's an embarrassment, like, for the child. Aren't you supposed to pay for embarrassment anyway? Like, isn't that a damage? Isn't that like a whole other category of things that you're supposed to pay for when you embarrass someone or like compensate for? And then if
I guess there's two things. One of them is that because the kid was injured by a donkey, he's not going to get a compensation for embarrassment at all.
Right.
Because donkeys only pay nezek. But I'm not sure that any assailant pays
like the embarrassment of getting assessed at a slave market as part of it, you know.
The humiliation of being involved in a court case or of being in I don't know that anyone actually, that's sort of parallel to in American law when you make somebody pay court costs.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like there's so many times where like something illegal happens, but like, do you have the financial abilities and the time and energy to actually like take any legal action about it? Like, legal action is something that's very limited to people depending on so many things, but like a lot of them is like socioeconomic status or like susceptibility to public humiliation, I guess, in this case.
It's certainly humiliating, or can be humiliating, to go to court. Also, people ask you personal questions in public and then you have to answer them truthfully, even if you don't want. Like, that's just a part of being in a courtroom.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we ever compensate people for the fact that they had to sue, which is effectively what this is. I'm not sure that we ever.
No, I think that's effectively what the question is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I feel like with having to like put yourself up in the slave market, that has a lot more emotional trauma associated with it than like many other court cases would. But
let me do a little research on that one and make sure that I'm not doing something stupid here. But my off the cuff answer is I don't think so. But let me try to find out.
Cool. Okay, that answers my questions for now. Thank you. And I'm sorry for like taking up so much question space.
No, very interesting questions. Anybody else have anything?
I just have it is probably for later on in the process. But in cases where where it's not just damages, but there's you're paying in part for culpability. Is there any place in the Talmud that considers the incarceration as a punishment?
So no, I'm going to give a qualified no to that. Incarceration is exceedingly expensive. So I think most societies didn't use it as a punishment, except like for the like personal pique of the king or whatever. Like, I don't like you, so I'm throwing you in a dungeon. But as a part of the legal system, it's just extremely expensive. The reason that I qualifying my no is that there are two situations in which we will incarcerate somebody. One of them is if we have somebody who we're waiting to see, like one of the cases that we read out in a pasuk about half an hour ago, we're waiting to see whether the victim dies so that we can't try the case until we know whether it's a murder case or an assault case. So in that case, I believe we do lock the person up in the meantime. And that could presumably be for some period of time. It can take a while before you know whether somebody's going to die of an injury. And that's not as a punishment. That's just because we want to still know where they are when it comes time to punish them. And otherwise, if they've got any sense at all, they'll leave town. The other thing is that the Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about an sort of an extrajudicial death penalty for people who we are sure are murderers, but we don't have the technicalities of a halachic death penalty. They weren't properly warned by the witnesses, or the witnesses are related to each other, or something like that. Something that doesn't stop us from believing that the witnesses are telling the truth, but we still can't put them to death. And that extrajudicial death penalty involves locking the person up and not feeding them for a period of time, and then overfeeding them so that their stomach explodes. So you are trapping them into committing suicide, basically, rather than killing them, which is horrific. And I have a lot of issues with it, but it does involve a sort of incarceration, so it seemed relevant here. But other than that, I don't know of cases of incarceration at all. But incarceration is very rare as a punishment in the pre-modern world. Okay, anybody else? Okay, we're a little short on Mondays in the immediate future. We will not be meeting next week or the week after, although I may see you in Shul. But I don't actually even know if I'm going to be in town, but we will not meet next Monday or the Monday after. I hope 3 weeks from this evening we will meet again. And Gemar Chatima Tova and Chag Sameach again. And I'll see you in a few weeks. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Mark
Thank
Tova.
you.
Yeah,
Or Fatima Tova.
thank you.